The Glass Blade by Enchanted Tales Hub. Chapter 1. The morning of the funeral, I polished his boots. Not because anyone would see them, not because he needed them polished, but because it was something I could still do for him. He always said a knight should meet the world on clean feet and steady legs. So I made sure he did, even in death. I didn't cry. Not when they lowered the coffin into the ground. Not when the priest mispronounced his name. Not even when the wind picked up and knocked over the wooden hawthorn carving I had left by the grave. Instead, I stood still, one hand on my belt, the other curled into a fist beneath my cloak. People whispered behind me, servants, neighbors, old soldiers who once rode beside him. She's too quiet. She was always strange, that one. I didn't care. I only listened for one voice. And it was gone. Beside me, Lady Corvina dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her veil trembled like a mourning dove's wing. Black from neck to heel, not a single fold out of place. She cried without sound. The perfect show. She hadn't shed a single tear when my father was alive. He married her 2 winters ago out of kindness, not love. A soft-hearted gesture to a widow with 2 daughters and nowhere to go. Now she had the house, the name, the money, and me. Her daughters clung to her sides like velvet shadows. They didn't even look at the grave. One of them was whispering about her shoes. My jaw ached from clenching. The guests left slowly in clusters. Voices trailing down the hill, boots crunching frost. I didn't stay to watch the last of them go. The minute the priest closed his book, I turned toward home, past the iron gate, across the dead lawn, up the stone steps to the front door. The manor looked different. Smaller. Like it didn't know what to do without him. The black ribbon tied to the door creaked in the wind. I didn't touch it. Just slipped inside before Lady Corvina could catch up. The halls were silent. Someone had already cleared the sitting room of flowers. The fireplace had gone cold. A tea tray sat untouched, and the hearth smelled faintly of burnt sage. I stepped out of my boots. Didn't call for the maid. Walked past the parlor, up the back stairwell, the one no one used anymore. Then I opened his door. The air inside was stale, like paper and steel. His boots were still by the bed. His scabbard rested against the wall. The blanket was folded perfectly, like he'd return any minute. He wouldn't. I sat down on the bench at the foot of his bed. The wood creaked under my weight, the only sound in the whole room. And I let myself breathe. 5 seconds. That's all I gave myself. Then I stood, crossed to the wardrobe, reached behind the old travel cloak and unhooked the latch hidden in the back panel. The compartment opened with a click. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth and tied with blue leather, was the blade. The one he made for me. Thin as glass. Sharp as truth. He gave it to me on my 15th birthday. Said, if the day comes when I'm not here, I want you to remember this. You are steel under silk. Let them forget. Remind them when it matters. I traced the edge with my finger. Didn't draw blood. Not yet. I left the sword where it was, not because I didn't want it, but because the stables waited first. I needed something heavier than silence. Outside, the wind bit through my sleeves, but I didn't feel it. I crossed the yard without a lantern. I knew the path by heart. Past the gnarled fig tree over the cobbled stones. The stable doors were old oak, warped at the bottom, but they opened easy with a firm push. Inside, it smelled like hay, sweat, and horse breath. Comfort in its own way. My mare, Ashen, lifted her head the moment I stepped in. She snorted softly and nudged the stall door with her nose. I know, I murmured. I'm late. She butted her head against my shoulder, not hard, but enough to let me know I'd kept her waiting. I rubbed her forehead and reached for the brush. Grooming her gave my hands something to do. Something steady. Something normal. When I finished, I slipped into the training stall at the far end. It wasn't much, just packed dirt, a few dummies made from stuffed hay sacks, and a worn wooden sword that used to belong to me when I was 10. My father never had the heart to throw it out. I picked up the blade, balanced the weight, then struck. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed in the beams above. I didn't fight to forget. I fought to remember. Each strike was a piece of his voice, a lesson, a command. Keep your stance wide. Don't look where you strike, feel it. Never let them touch your core. I don't know how long I trained. When I stopped, my hands were raw again. Not bleeding, not shaking, just alive. Ashen was watching from her stall, her ears twitching. I was brushing dirt off my sleeves when I heard them. Voices, soft and snide, coming from the other side of the stable wall. I stepped quietly into the shadows between the tack shelves. There was a nod in the wood, a perfect little window to the path outside. Do we really have to stay in this frozen dump all winter? That was the older one, Celine, the one who thought she could make a crown out of powder and perfume. Mama says we should be patient, said the younger, Brenna, her tone bored. Let the ashes settle or something. Then we can start rearranging things. Celine laughed, quick and sharp. You mean once she folds? Brenna, Raya? She won't fold. She stares like she wants to cut something. Celine, she's bluffing. Girls like her are always bluffing. All bark, no teeth. She's not even that pretty. Brenna, she's strong though. A pause. Celine, she's alone. That's what she is. And we're not. Their footsteps continued down the path toward the house. One of them giggled. I didn't move. Not for a while. Their words didn't sting, not really. I'd heard worse. But the last one was true. I was alone. By the time I stepped out of the stable, the sun had slipped behind the hills. The sky was bruised purple, the kind of color that made the manor look colder than it was. The front door creaked open as I approached. She stood in the entryway. Lady Corvina. No veil now. Just her face. Composed, dry-eyed, lips gently pressed into a line that said, "This house is mine now." She didn't speak, didn't move aside. I stopped a few paces from the stairs and stared at her. No words. Just silence between us, thick as smoke. She held my gaze for a moment, then turned and walked inside. I followed, up the stairs, past the parlor, straight to my room. They didn't call me for dinner. I didn't go. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the sword on the wall above my desk, not the glass one, the wooden one from when I was small. It still had the faded red cloth he'd tied around the hilt. My stomach growled. I ignored it. The quiet wasn't peace. It was a test. And I don't lose. Chapter 2. The next morning, I left before breakfast. The sky was dull and gray. The air smelled like old leaves and chimney smoke. I walked to town alone, cloak drawn up, hair braided tight, boots kicking dust from the stone road. Everyone I passed offered a nod or a look of pity. I didn't return either. The lawyer's office sat at the far end of the square, above the candle shop. The bell on the door chimed softly as I stepped in. "Miss Raya," said Master Edric, rising behind a desk covered in scrolls and ledgers. He was a stiff, pale man with sad eyes and fingers inked black from a lifetime of signatures. "I came to hear my father's will," I said. "I believe the timing is now appropriate." He nodded and gestured to the chair across from him. "Yes, of course. Please." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. Broke the wax. Cleared his throat. "By order of Sir Aldrin Thorne, Knight of the Fifth Line, I hereby pass the majority of my estate, including the manor, the land, all financial holdings, and personal effects, to my daughter, Raya Thorne." The words echoed in my ears, but I didn't flinch. Edric continued. "To Lady Corvina and her daughters, I leave the West Cottage, the winter orchard stipend, and enough inheritance to maintain their current lifestyle as a gesture of goodwill." I leaned back in the chair. He looked up, waiting for a reaction. "I expected as much," I said. "You did." "My father was kind," I said, standing. "But he wasn't stupid." I returned home with Master Edric just after noon. The sky had cleared, but the wind had teeth. As we walked through the gates, I noticed two gardeners stop trimming the hedges. One of the maids, Laura, peeked from the kitchen window, eyes wide. Word travels fast in a house like this. Faster than horses. When I opened the front door, Corvina was already waiting. Her daughters flanked her like mismatched statues, one trying to appear confused, the other smug and unbothered. I didn't speak. I let the lawyer do it. "Lady Corvina," Edric said with a small bow. "I've just read Sir Aldrin's will, as dictated by his last instructions." Her smile twitched at the edges. The corners of her mouth struggled to stay lifted. "Yes, well, of course he would have left something for me," she said sweetly. "We were married, after all." Edric nodded politely, then opened the scroll again. "Indeed. You and your daughters have been granted use of the West Cottage and an annual stipend sufficient for your upkeep." The room fell silent. You could hear the wind whistling through the chimney. The younger stepsister's jaw dropped. The elder tried to recover with a scoff. Corvina blinked once, twice, as if her world had just tilted sideways. "The manor, lands, accounts, and all titles," Edric continued, "are now the sole property of Miss Raya Thorne." There was a sharp breath from someone behind us, one of the maids, I think. Another servant, the cook, grinned. She tried to hide it. Every loyal staff member knew what this meant. Order would return. Not the old order, the real one. "It will be Raya's decision," Edric added, folding the scroll, "whether you remain in this manor or relocate to the cottage as originally written." Then he bowed slightly, and without another word, he left. Corvina didn't move at first. She just stood there, trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on the scroll Edric had left on the table. Then she laughed. A soft, bitter laugh that didn't touch her eyes. "Your father was a fool," she said. "Always was." I froze. Letting a child run around with swords instead of sending her to finishing school, she spat. Giving everything to a half-wild girl instead of the woman who kept this house from falling apart. Her daughters shifted uncomfortably behind her, but said nothing. "He promised me stability," she went on, eyes sharp now. "A life. Safety. Do you think I married him for his charm?" She stepped closer. "You think you deserve all this just because you were born here? You should thank me for holding this place together while your father played soldier and you played dress-up with knives." My hands curled into fists at my sides. Your father would never put me in that bone box in the orchard," she snapped. "You're framing this," she hissed. "This is your doing. You twisted him against us. You turned him into a coward, signing away our rights like we were nothing." She looked like she wanted to rip the scroll in half. "This manor should be mine. It was supposed to be ours. That was the deal. That was it. The deal. The plan." Everything she'd hidden behind lace and fake tears. "You just said it," I whispered. My voice shook not from fear, but fury. She blinked. Her mouth opened. "You think this place was a reward for playing pretend?" I said, stepping forward. "You think he owed you a crown for marrying into his name? I was going to let you stay. But now I see exactly who you are." I raised my hand and pointed to the door. "Get out of my sight before I change my mind about that cottage too." "You want to lose that as well?" I said, voice like ice. "Then stay. One more word, and you'll be begging on frost-bitten streets by morning." For a long while, there was nothing. Just the fading echo of my voice in the high stone hall. Corvina had turned and walked off, her steps sharp but uneven, trailing fabric and fury behind her. Her daughters scurried after her in silence, glancing once over their shoulders like they couldn't quite believe what just happened. And then quiet, heavy and clean, like the air before snowfall. I didn't speak. I didn't move. The maids still standing at the corners of the room had stopped pretending not to listen. The footman near the stairs had gone stiff as a statue. I caught Laura's eyes. She gave me the smallest of nods. It was enough. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 15. Then the shouting began. It echoed from the upper floor, sharp, unhinged, words barely forming sense. "How dare she, after everything I gave this house? You think she's fit to rule? A girl with mud on her boots and blades on her belt. This place will fall into ruin without me." A door slammed. Glass clinked. "She's a child playing war. I was born to lead. I brought class. I brought order." The staff had gathered now. Quietly. Not in fear. But as witnesses. One of the butlers, Gerald, who had served since before I was born, looked to me. I said nothing. Then he climbed the stairs. He reached the top just as Corvina flung open her bedroom door. Her hair was coming undone. Her voice shrill. "You're all blind if you can't see what she's doing. You think she'll care for you like I did? You think she knows how to run this estate?" Gerald's voice was calm. low, firm. "We served you, Lady Corvina," he said, "because our master asked us to treat you with respect. He was a good man, and he taught us to be good in return." He stepped aside, allowing the others to stand behind him: Laura, the cook, the stable boy, the house steward, each with eyes forward, each standing straight. "But we saw who you were the moment you stepped through this door," he said, "and we stayed silent for his sake." He paused. "That time is over." Then he bowed his head toward me. "This house belongs to Lady Raya now, and we serve her." His words echoed like steel. "You will leave before we make you." Corvina opened her mouth, but no sound came. She stared at me, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw fear. Not rage, not bitterness, just cold, helpless fear. She turned and left. They stood like soldiers, not with weapons, not with shouts, but with calm, steady backs, eyes that held truth. I watched them: Gerald, Laura, Cook Marla, even Tomas from the stables, and something cracked open in my chest. Warmth. Real, solid warmth. Not the kind that trembles like grief. The kind that holds. For a moment, I just stood there, hands still, letting the silence wrap around me like armor made of breath. These people had seen me and chosen to stand with me. By late afternoon, the gates creaked open once more. A cart stood outside, stacked with carefully tied trunks and boxes. Corvina stepped out in full black, chin high, shoulders stiff. Her daughters followed, sulking behind her like wilted flowers. Neither spoke a word. The house stood quiet as they passed. No goodbyes. No fuss. No one offered to carry their bags. Just the sound of luggage wheels scraping across stone. At the gate, she glanced back once. But I didn't give her anything. Not a look. Not a word. She turned and walked away. That night, after the halls had gone still and the embers in the hearth faded to soft gold, I made my way down the long corridor. My steps echoed softly. The staff had returned to their rooms. The manor, for once, felt like it was sleeping, not mourning. I stopped outside the study door. The handle was warm in my hand. I took a breath and stepped inside. The room smelled like old paper and pine oil. Nothing had been touched. The desk was still scattered with my father's last notes, estate plans, guard rosters, and unfinished letters sealed but never sent. I walked to his chair and ran my fingers along the backrest. Sat down slowly. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Then I saw it, a small box resting on the top shelf. Dark wood, metal latch, simple and square. The fire in the hearth had dimmed to a soft, flickering red. I reached up and took the box from the shelf. It was heavier than I expected. The lid had my name, Raya, carved in clean lines. His hand. His work. No lock. Just a simple metal latch. I opened it. Inside, wrapped in deep blue cloth, were 3 things. First, a letter, sealed with his crest, the thistle and sword. The wax cracked cleanly as I broke it. "Raya, if you're reading this, it means I've run out of time. And I hate that. There was more I wanted to teach you. Not just how to wield a blade or read a map, but how to live with strength when no one's watching. That part you'll have to learn on your own. But I trust you. I've seen who you're becoming. I saw it the first time you stood between your mother's grave and that wolfhound, barely taller than the sword you carried. And I saw it again the day you sparred me and didn't hold back. You don't need anyone's permission to lead. You never did. But in case you doubt it, I've left you what was once mine, and what should always have been yours. With pride, Father, I set the letter down. My throat felt tight. Underneath the cloth, I found the second item, a journal, bound in leather, the edges worn from years of use. Inside were pages of notes, maps, codes, strategies, lessons, and stories. Some I'd heard at the fireside. Others I never had. He'd written them all for me. And beneath the journal, hidden in a false bottom of the box, a blade. Not steel, not silver, but glass pale as moonlight, forged smooth and elegant, with a hilt wrapped in leather darkened by time. It shimmered faintly in the firelight, humming with memory. I ran my fingers along the blade's edge, not sharp to touch, but I knew better. Glass could be beautiful and deadly. He had always said that strength wasn't just how hard you hit. It was how long you stood still. I folded the journal shut and set it beside the box. The letter I kept in my lap, creased and soft beneath my hand. The fire crackled once, low and tired. Outside, the wind stirred the ivy on the windows. Inside, nothing moved. I sat in my father's chair, wrapped in warmth and memory, and for the first time since the funeral, I let myself exhale. "I'll protect it all," I whispered. Not to him, not to the house, to myself. I'll protect it all, just like you did. Chapter 3. 3 days had passed since the house changed hands. No bells rang. No official scrolls announced it. But everyone felt it, the shift. Servants who once tiptoed around Lady Corvina now moved with certainty. The hearths burned warmer. The halls no longer echoed like tombs. The manor was waking up. I spent my mornings walking the grounds, learning every inch of it as if it were a battlefield. The east orchard had rot in the roots. The guardhouse roof was crumbling. The grain cellar inventory hadn't been updated in months. Father had been many things: brave, honorable, sharp, but practical. Not always. He left things undone, because he trusted me to finish them. And I would. I didn't issue orders with shouts. I asked first, then listened. I didn't pretend to know everything. I learned. From Gerald, I learned the staff's rhythms. From Cook Marla, I learned the budgets. From the steward, I learned which tenants were honest and which only smiled when coin passed hands. From Laura, I learned what kind of tea everyone drank and what gossip they whispered in the laundry halls. At night, I returned to the study. Read more of the journal. He'd written advice like battlefield notes. If they fear you, they obey once. If they respect you, they obey always. A locked door doesn't protect half as well as an open one with loyal eyes. I copied the lines I liked best and pinned them to the wall. One evening, while tightening the sword brackets in the training hall, I caught Tomas staring at me. "Something on your mind?" I asked, wiping dust from my hands. He hesitated, then nodded. "Didn't think you'd do all this yourself." Why? Most lords and ladies don't, he said. They sit and wait for things to come to them. I gave him a half smile. I wasn't raised to sit. Chapter 4. The woods south of the orchard were quiet this morning. Cool, damp air hung low, softening the crunch of hooves on the leaf-covered trail. I let Ashen pick the pace. She liked to walk slow after being kept in the stables too long. The manor was well out of sight now, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to keep my back straight. I could breathe. Ashen stopped. Ears up. Eyes fixed ahead. Muscles tense. I narrowed my eyes, shifting in the saddle. The trail curved around a thicket, and I saw the shape of a man. Then two more behind him. And when I turned my head slightly, I caught the flicker of movement in the brush behind us. Trapped. My hand went to the hilt at my hip. 5 in total. No crusts. No colors. Rough clothes, weather-worn boots. They moved like men who were used to dirt and danger, not polished swords. One of them stepped forward. He looked amused. You wandered far today, little lady. I didn't answer. My fingers tightened on the hilt. Drop the sword, he said, more like a suggestion than a demand. No one has to bleed today. He didn't sound threatening. He sounded confident. Paid. Like he thought this would be easy. I dismounted. Slowly. Not out of fear. Ashen didn't like blood. I wasn't going to let her panic when it spilled. Who sent you? I asked. He shrugged. Gold's gold. Don't take it personal. I did. But I kept my voice even. You've got one chance to walk away. Take it. They didn't. Of course not. The one on the left lunged first. Too fast, not enough control. I stepped aside, grabbed his arm, and slammed my elbow into his ribs. He dropped. The next came wide, swinging high. I ducked, turned, and caught his leg clean with my blade. He went down screaming. 2 more circled. I shifted my stance, feet grounded, blade forward, breath steady. My ribs were already aching from a grazing cut, but I ignored it. Pain later. Focus now. One tried to grab me. Big mistake. I turned into his swing, used his momentum against him, and knocked him flat. The last 2 broke and ran into the woods. Cowards. The one who cut me was still groaning in the dirt. I knelt by him. Who sent you? He looked at me, eyes bloodshot, mouth full of fear, but didn't speak. He couldn't. Or wouldn't. I stood. I cleaned my blade on the edge of my cloak, sheathed it, and turned to Ashen. She was calm now. Waiting. Let's go home. We started back, but the path curved wrong. I tried to follow the trail markers the carved stones father had set along the edge years ago, but the forest was thick here. Unfamiliar. Ashen didn't seem worried, so I let her lead. But something was off. The air had that same weight again, not danger, just tension. Like it was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Steel. Grunts. Shouts. The sharp sound of blades meeting blades. Not the same voices as before. Different. I kicked gently at Ashen's side. She broke into a gallop. Whoever they were, if they were like the last ones, I'd finish the job this time. But when I reached the clearing, I pulled hard on the reins. Because this wasn't what I expected. I reined Ashen just short of the clearing's edge. 6 men. possibly more in the trees. Hard to tell with the way they moved, fast, aggressive, no uniforms. In the center, a young man fought alone. Dark hair, blood on his face, long coat torn at the shoulder. He moved like someone trained not for show, but for war. He held off 3 men at once. 2 others lay near a shattered cart, barely conscious or dead. Friends of his, maybe guards. One twitched, but didn't rise. The lone fighter turned and slashed, took one man down, but he was tiring. I didn't think twice. I kicked Ashen forward. She charged straight into the nearest attacker, hooves cracking against bone. I leapt from the saddle before she even stopped, landing hard on the moss and drawing my blade mid-motion. The man closest to me turned, eyes wide. He didn't get the chance to shout. Steel met ribs. He dropped. The stranger caught sight of me, just for a second, his eyes sharp with surprise. Then he nodded, once, like he understood we were allies now. He didn't ask questions. Smart. He turned and blocked an axe swing meant for his skull. I stepped in, cut low, and finished the man before he could blink. Another one came from behind. Ashen reared, her scream sharp and loud, and scared him just enough for me to get the upper hand. We moved fast, the 2 of us, back to back once or twice, breaking off and crashing back together. Every step, we covered each other. I didn't know his name. Didn't need to. All I knew was that we were still standing and they weren't. When it ended, 5 more bodies littered the forest floor. One attacker ran. Neither of us chased him. I was bleeding again. My shoulder this time. The stranger was worse, cut above the brow, limping slightly, but still upright. The clearing was still again. I stood with my blade loose in my hand, blood dripping from my sleeve onto the forest floor. I finally turned toward him. He was gripping his thigh just above the knee, blood seeping between his fingers. The wound didn't look fatal, but deep. Sloppy cut. Close call. He met my eyes, but said nothing. That was fine. I didn't need him to talk. I stepped forward and crouched beside him, reaching into the side pouch of my saddlebag where I kept linen and salve. He flinched when I touched the wound, not from pain, but instinct. I raised a brow. If I meant to kill you, I wouldn't be using clean cloth. He didn't reply. Once the bleeding was under control, I looked past him toward the broken cart, where 2 of his men lay crumpled in the leaves. I rose and walked over. One was gone, eyes open still. The other, barely breathing. A shallow rise and fall in his chest, a dark line of blood soaking his side. Alive, but only just. I returned. One's alive, I said simply. The other's not. The young man's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. His cloak was lined with fine stitching, his boots worn but well made. He moved like someone trained in more than one kind of war. Highborn. Noble, probably. But no title left his mouth. I didn't push. I stood straight and glanced up at the forest canopy. Storm clouds were creeping over the treetops. The last thing we needed was to be caught out here with wounds and a dying man. I whistled once, sharp and short, and Ashen stepped closer. I have a manor half a day's ride from here, I said, not waiting for permission. You'll bleed out if you stay. Your friend won't last the hour. Still, no reply. But he didn't resist when I pulled his arm around my shoulders and helped him up. He winced, but leaned on me just enough to stay upright. Once he was secure in the saddle, I tied his injured companion carefully to Ashen's side, enough to keep him steady. The dead would remain where he fell. For now, as I mounted, I spoke without looking back. My name is Raya Thorne. I paused, giving him a chance to respond. He didn't, just held on, silent, as I turned Ashen toward the northern trail. We rode without speaking. He never asked who I was, or what the house was called, or what gave me the right to carry a sword like that. But I could feel his eyes on me studying. Chapter 5. The manor came into view just as the first drops of rain hit my shoulder. By the time we reached the gates, the clouds had opened a slow, steady fall that turned dirt to mud and blood to streaks. I didn't need to call anyone. The staff saw me coming from the tower window. By the time Ashen stepped into the courtyard, lanterns were lit, voices moving fast. Marla ran from the kitchens, apron already off. Tomas from the stables, cloak half buttoned. Gerald, sharp-eyed, shouting orders. And the butler Thornaby stepped out from the front doors, coat already soaked through, but still composed. I didn't speak right away, just slid off the saddle, stiff with pain, and motioned toward the injured man tied to Ashen's side. Alive, but barely. Hands reached up to take him. No one asked questions. Not yet. The stranger, still on horseback, eased himself down with a wince. He met no one's eyes. Didn't speak. Just stood there, weight on one leg, rain in his hair, cloak heavy with mud and blood. Thornaby stepped forward, expression unreadable. His eyes flicked over the man, then widened, just slightly. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "Miss Raya, do you know who he is?" I glanced at the stranger, then back at Thornaby. No. I found him fighting off assassins in the eastern woods. Looked like someone wanted him dead. The butler's lips parted. He looked like he was about to speak, but the stranger raised a hand. Not rudely, just firmly. There was something in that gesture. Not fear, not arrogance, just command. The butler hesitated, then gave a small nod and stepped back. The stranger turned to me. His voice was quiet, low from blood loss, but steady. "My name is Alden Vale, and the man beside me is Cale." He didn't blink as he said it. "You'll both stay here," I said. "You'll stay here until you're strong enough to leave on your own." Neither of them argued. The rest of the night passed in motion. Cale was moved to the spare healing room near the east wing. One of the old maids had once kept herbs there. I'd cleaned it out last month, not knowing how badly it would be needed. Alden, or whoever he really was, refused a bed in the guest chambers. "I don't need comfort. Just rest," he said, standing in the doorway with a dark stain spreading down his pant leg. So I gave him the old reading room. Stiff-backed couch, warm fire, plenty of space. He didn't say thank you, but he didn't need to. By midnight, the manor had quieted. The halls were dark again. I washed the blood from my arms, poured a bowl of soup, and sat by the fire outside their room. I didn't know why I stayed, but I wasn't ready to sleep. Not yet. The next 3 days passed in slow rhythm. No blades, no shouting, just firelight, bandages, and the kind of silence that let you think too much. Kale's condition held steady. Cook Marla brewed poultices that smelled like boiled tree bark and mint, and the kitchen girl rotated the cloths on his side twice a day. He didn't wake, not fully, but he stirred sometimes when Alden spoke near him, which wasn't often. Alden, if that was really his name, kept mostly to the old reading room. He sat near the window during daylight, shoulder stiff, leg braced on a stool. He didn't ask for help, but he didn't turn it down when I brought water, clean wraps, or a plate of stew. He watched everything. Me, the staff, the doors, always alert, like he expected trouble to follow him here. On the fourth morning, I brought a kettle to the reading room. He sat near the fire, bandages still tight around his thigh, his sword propped beside the chair like it was part of him. I poured 2 mugs, set one beside him, then sat opposite and looked straight at him. So I said, "Where exactly is Alden Vale from?" He didn't flinch. "A northern province, near the river border." "Which river?" "The Fenlo." I sipped. "What's your trade?" "I work under a noble family. Guard detail." "And they let you ride alone with only 2 men, carrying a blade like that?" "I wasn't supposed to be alone." He didn't elaborate. I studied him. He lied easily. Not with fear, with habit. But nothing in him felt dangerous to me. Just hidden. And honestly, I had enough danger already. I set my mug down. "Once you're well, do you plan to head back north?" "That's the idea." "And your man Kale, is he your friend? Or just assigned to you?" A small pause. "He's both." I nodded, then leaned back slightly in my chair. "You'll need an escort when you go. Whoever came after you the first time might not be finished. We can manage. On one good leg and a half-dead man?" I didn't smile, just waited. He looked at me like he was measuring the room. "And me in it. Would you ride with us?" he asked finally. I blinked once. "That's my question, not yours." He gave the smallest laugh, not mocking, more like he hadn't expected me to be quicker than him. I stood and gathered the empty mugs. "I don't like lies in my house," I said, without turning. "But I've seen worse men than you. If you're bringing danger here, I expect honesty next time it knocks." Still no answer. But this time, when I left the room, I could feel him watching me, not with suspicion, with interest. Chapter 6. I woke to sunlight warming the corner of the window and the usual sounds of morning, boots on stone, spoons against pots, Tomas shouting at the chickens like they were personal enemies. I dressed and stepped out into the hallway, already rolling up my sleeves. Thornaby met me halfway down the corridor. "They're gone," he said. I stopped. "Who?" He gave a small nod toward the east wing. "The men from the woods. Left before sunup. Left no note, no thanks. Just walked out. Kale was walking fine, not well, but enough." I blinked once, then turned toward the reading room, even though I knew it would be empty. The fire had burned out. The chair was cold. No trace left except a strip of clean bandage still folded on the table. They were good at leaving. Did anyone stop them? I asked. "They weren't prisoners, Miss Raya." He hesitated. Should we be concerned? I shook my head once. No. Let it go. I didn't think of Alden again that day. Not much, anyway. There were repairs to oversee, training to resume, grain stores to be tallied. And the forge door had jammed again, which meant I spent half an hour with a hammer and more swearing than I'd admit. The manor settled back into its rhythm. So did I, mostly. 1 week later, the letter came mid-morning. Sealed in deep red wax, pressed with the royal crest, the lion's crown. Delivered by a soldier in polished black boots who stood taller than my front door. Thornaby brought it straight to me, his brows already knit. I took it and turned it over in my hand before breaking the seal. The paper was thick, edges gilded, and the words inside were written in a precise, practiced hand. Lady Raya Thorne, you are formally invited to a celebration at the Royal Palace in honor of the safe return of His Highness, Crown Prince Edric, from his recent diplomatic mission across the eastern border. Your presence is requested among guests recognized for service to the realm. The ball will be held under the summer stars 7 nights from now. Formal attire is required. Weapons are not permitted within the palace walls. On behalf of His Majesty King Corwin, I folded the letter and set it down beside my cup. Thornaby stood waiting, hands clasped behind his back. I didn't speak, and neither did he. The fire crackled softly. Outside, I heard Tomas yelling at someone to get off the roof again. Then he finally asked, "Will you attend?" I leaned back in the chair. "It's a royal summons," I said. "Not a suggestion." He gave a slight bow. 3 days before the ball, I stood before the seamstress in town, the same one who once tailored my father's formal uniforms and gave her 2 clear instructions: nothing frilly, nothing slow, and make room for movement. The final piece arrived the morning of the ball. Midnight blue, stitched with silver threads so fine it only caught the light when I moved. Long sleeves, high neckline, a split in the skirt masked by layered panels, just enough for easy steps or sudden turns. No corset. I wanted to breathe. My hair I tied back in a half knot, letting the rest fall loose around my shoulders. Polished, but not prim. No jewels. Just a single silver pin at my collar, shaped like a thorn branch. My mother's. Then came the shoes. Clear. Sleek. Cut from reinforced glass. Not fragile forged. Designed with a slim steel layer hidden inside the heel. Sharp enough to wound if kicked with the right angle. Only the blacksmith and I knew the truth of them. He'd smirked when I described what I wanted. A lady's slipper that stabs? That's exactly right. I didn't wear them because I was afraid. I wore them because I'd seen what people are like when masks come off. Because no palace, no matter how golden, was safe just because someone called it royal. Because a girl in silk could still bleed. And if she bled, she'd better be able to bleed someone back. I stepped into them slowly, the weight familiar. They clicked once on the stone floor, light, perfect, silent after that. No one at the palace would suspect a thing. After all, who would think to search a shoe? As dusk fell, I stepped out into the courtyard. Thornaby waited by the carriage, glancing once at my boots before bowing. "Shall I prepare a blade for your sleeve, Miss Raya?" I shook my head. Already armed. And with that, I climbed in. The manor disappeared behind me as the wheels rolled forward. Ahead, the palace waited, full of mirrors and masks. The palace gates opened at sunset. White stone walls bathed in gold. Towers like spears against the sky. Flags rustling overhead, deep crimson and silver. The carriage wheels echoed through the inner court. When I stepped out, I was already being watched. Guards in polished breastplates lined the path. Servants moved in tight, silent rhythm. Somewhere inside, music pulsed faintly, and the scent of roses and roasted pheasant drifted on the air. I didn't fidget, didn't pause. My shoes clicked against marble, sharp, clear. At the grand entrance, a herald in gold-trimmed black held a scroll. He barely glanced at me before lifting his voice. Lady Raya Thorne of the Northern Vale, daughter of the late Commander Thorne. Dozens of heads turned. Some recognized the name. Others didn't, but they stared anyway. I kept walking. The ballroom was vast, a sea of velvet and candlelight. Mirrors framed every wall, making it seem endless. Gowns glittered like frost. Men stood like chess pieces, hands behind backs, watching the board. And then I saw them. They were dressed in gold and pink. Lace so thick it nearly swallowed their necks. Glitter dusted over cheeks, not evenly, just smeared like someone had panicked and grabbed a powder puff last minute. Corvina, my stepmother, stood near one of the larger archways, all false elegance. Her dress fit too tight around the arms, and she held her chin so high I thought her neck might snap. She wore pearls that didn't quite match real, perhaps, but borrowed or bought in a rush. Beside her, her daughters stood like stiff porcelain dolls. Both overdressed, overly painted. One looked like she'd tried to curl her hair and ended up burning half of it. The other kept blinking under heavy false lashes that refused to settle. They didn't see me at first. Good. Corvina was speaking to a tall man in crisp black with a golden seal at his collar, the king's steward. Her voice was low and trembling in all the right places, hand to heart like a grieving widow. I knew that act. I'd seen it before. She was fishing again, this time in higher waters. I didn't interrupt, didn't even shift my gaze. I just stepped into the ballroom and let my eyes sweep the rest of the room. Some faces familiar, merchants from the capital, a few noble sons I'd sparred with once in training, others I'd seen beside my father in war councils. Most looked through me. Only a few looked at me. I was used to that. The music shifted. Strings softer now. Tempo slower, ceremonial. A man in deep red stepped to the center arch, voice clear above the room. His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Edric of Solmere. The ballroom shifted like a wave rolling back before a tide. Heads turned. Fans froze. Gowns swished and heels adjusted. Everyone wanted to be taller, prettier, more visible. I stayed still. At first, I couldn't see him. He entered slowly, flanked by guards who peeled away at the edge of the floor. He wasn't dressed like a prince out of stories, no gold trim, no velvet cloak. Just black. Tailored, sharp, and quiet. Then I saw his face. And stopped breathing for half a second. It was him. Alden. Or Edric. The man I'd pulled from the dirt and nearly bled beside in the forest. Our eyes locked across the floor. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't smile either. Just watched me, the way he had before. The music swelled. The other girls moved, subtly, like petals leaning towards sunlight. He didn't look at any of them, didn't hesitate. He crossed the ballroom, every eye following his steps, until he stopped just a foot from me. "Lady Raya," he said, voice quiet but sure. "Would you honor me with the first dance?" I didn't glance around, didn't play coy, didn't ask why. I just nodded once. Yes, and took his hand. We stepped onto the floor together as the strings lifted into motion. The world blurred around us, silk and whispers and envy, as the dance began. He led. I followed, but only just. We moved as if we'd trained for this, not the dance, but the rhythm. The give and take. The trust between two people who've already seen each other bleeding. Behind me, I caught the faintest hiss of breath. Then a voice low, sharp, bitter, meant for no one's ears but her own. "You little witch." Corvina. I didn't turn. Didn't need to. I felt her fury like heat behind my back. Her daughters frozen beside her, wide-eyed and glittering for nothing. She had clawed her way here for this chance. And I had taken it by saying nothing at all. The music pulled us across the floor like wind draws a flame. I wasn't thinking of the room. Not the chandeliers overhead, not the murmurs or stares. Not even Corvina's poison breathing down my back. Just the way his hand moved steady on my waist, fingers light but sure. Edric didn't dance like a prince. He danced like a soldier trained to read the weight of another body. Measured, balanced, present. My dress flowed around us, midnight blue against his black, threading silver sparks through each turn. The skirt spun lightly with every step, catching glints of the chandelier above. I had never worn anything so soft, never moved so quietly. And in the center of it all, he looked at me like the rest of the world wasn't worth noticing. I didn't blush, but I did meet his gaze a little longer than I meant to. The final step came. We parted with a slow breath. The room exhaled around us. Applause, light and polite. A new tune began, this one quicker, looser, meant for crowds and laughter. Partners switching, voices rising. Courtiers swarming the floor like bees around sugar. He didn't wait. He leaned close, spoke low. "Come with me." I didn't argue. We stepped off the floor without a glance backward, weaving through silk and velvet and powdered cheeks until the edge of the ballroom gave way to moonlight. The doors opened to the garden, a space carved in stone and vine, full of soft lamps and heavy blossoms. It smelled of roses and quiet. He led us beneath an arbor. Only then did he speak again. I left early because it wasn't safe. His voice was steady now. No hesitation. They weren't supposed to find me. That attack in the forest, it was planned. There's tension in the Eastern Court. Someone wanted to make sure I didn't return. He paused, looked at me. You weren't meant to be part of that, but you stepped in, risked everything. I didn't say anything. I let him speak. I didn't tell you who I was because I needed space to think, to stay unseen. You gave me that. He lowered his eyes, just briefly. I should have left a note. I should have said thank you in words that made sense. He looked up again, quieter now. So I'll say it now. Thank you for saving my life, for giving me shelter, for not demanding answers when I had none ready. I watched him speak, really watched, and it was strange. Before, I'd only seen the soldier, the guarded silence, the wounds, the weight behind his steps. But now, under soft golden lamps, I saw him as something else too. The tilt of his jaw, the warm light in his eyes when he spoke gently, the way his voice held steadiness, like he'd trained not just to command, but to earn trust. He was beautiful, not in a fairy tale way, in a real way, grounded, strong, alive. I didn't tell him any of that. Just let the moment settle. The garden held its breath. I stood beneath the vines, my hands lightly clasped in front of me, watching him as his words settled into the air. Thank you, he'd said. Not as a prince, as a man who knew he owed something real. I didn't offer a grand response, didn't try to match his speech with poetry or sweetness. I just stepped a little closer, not enough to close the space entirely, but enough for him to know I accepted it. You're welcome, I said quietly. And apology accepted. His eyes softened, just slightly, like some knot in his chest had loosened. Neither of us moved to break the stillness. We stood under the hanging roses, lamps glowing gently between the branches, listening to the hum of distant music from the ballroom. There was nothing else to say, but the silence wasn't empty. It was warm. Then a rustle, soft, quick, from the trees just beyond the hedges. I turned my head sharply. He did too. Not loud enough to be an animal. Not close enough for a servant. Something else. I narrowed my eyes at the dark behind the arbor's edge. The soft thud of a heel, maybe. A breath held too long. The music inside went on, violins and laughter, oblivious. But I didn't take my eyes off the trees. Did you hear that? I asked. His hand moved subtly, like he was reaching for a sword that wasn't there. The rustle grew louder. Then, from behind the arbor, two men stepped out. Uniforms black and crimson, matching the royal guard. But their hands were wrong. Too still. Too ready. Their eyes didn't scan the grounds. They locked straight onto the prince. And didn't blink. Edric reacted first, stepping slightly in front of me. My foot shifted behind his out of reflex, not fear. Then came the second pair. From behind us this time, two more figures, same suits, same frozen stare. Too clean to be gardeners. Too quiet to be friendly. Move, one of them said. Flat. Final. We didn't. And that's when everything broke. The first blow came fast. A punch meant for Edric's side, blocked just in time. He twisted, ducked, and slammed his elbow back into the man's gut. I dropped low, sweeping my leg behind the nearest attacker's knees and taking him down hard. No time to breathe. No time to think. Just fists. Movement. Training. Edric fought like someone who'd been drilled since childhood, clean, efficient, merciless. He struck fast, pivoted quicker, dodging a swing that would have broken his jaw. One of the attackers pulled a short sword from under his coat. That's when I knew it wasn't just intimidation. It was a kill order. Edric's back was turned. He didn't see the blade coming. I didn't call out. didn't warn him. I moved. My hand went to my ankle. I kicked the glass slipper off, smooth, fluid, caught it by the arch, and felt the weight of the steel-bladed heel. Then I threw it. Not like a stone, like a blade. It spun once in the air, clear as moonlight, and struck the attacker clean in the throat. He staggered, dropped the sword, fell. Blood bloomed across his collar. Everything stopped for a breath. Then the others moved again. But too late, the palace guards had heard the commotion. Boots pounded onto the gravel paths. Real soldiers flooded in, blades drawn, eyes sharp. They took down the last 2 attackers in seconds. Edric caught my eye, breathing hard, bruised, a cut on his cheekbone already blooming red. I stood barefoot in the garden, dress torn at the hem, and one shoe missing. The guards surrounded us, and behind them, I could see the prince's captain rushing forward with more soldiers. Edric stared down at the body, then at the glass blade, still gleaming with blood on the path. "Was that your shoe?" he asked. I wiped my hand on my dress. One of them. Chapter 7. The ballroom danced on. Laughter. Music. Gowns swirling like petals in the candlelight. No one inside knew that 4 men bled in the garden, or that a girl in a midnight blue dress had just killed a would-be assassin with her shoe. We were ushered through a side corridor. Edric walked beside me, breathing steadier now, one hand pressed over the shallow cut along his jaw. I walked barefoot, the remaining slipper tucked under my arm. None of the guards spoke. They didn't need to. They were taking us to the only place that mattered now. The king's chambers were on the north wing, vaulted ceilings, dark red drapes, stone hearth lit with a fire that never quite flickered. A table stood at the center, layered with maps and wax-sealed scrolls. When we entered, the king stood beside it. No crown, no throne. Just a tall, gray-bearded man in deep blue robes, rings on every other finger, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He didn't pace. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at me. Edric stepped forward first and bowed low. I inclined my head, just enough to show respect, not submission. The king waved his son aside and turned fully to me. "So," he said, voice low and steady, "this is the girl with the glass weapon." I raised an eyebrow. Didn't answer. He let out a faint breath, amusement, maybe. Then, twice now. "You've saved my son's life. Once in the wild and again tonight. I owe you more than thanks." I didn't move, just watched him. Kings gave thanks the same way they gave orders, measured, careful, edged in strategy. He nodded slightly toward Edric. He told me everything. About the forest, the ambush, the time at your estate. He spoke highly of you. A beat. He said you didn't ask for anything. Not even a name. The fire crackled softly behind us, casting long shadows on the polished stone floor. The king's tone had softened, not as a ruler, but as a father. "You've given me back my son. Twice." His eyes met mine. "Thank you, Lady Raya." Before I could respond, the door opened behind us. The king's steward stepped in, holding something wrapped in silk. He gave a short bow. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty. I believe this belongs to Lady Raya." He unfolded the cloth carefully. The second glass slipper glinted in his hands, its heel still faintly stained with red. Before I could reach for it, someone else stepped forward. Edric. He took the shoe from Stuart's hands, held it with a strange kind of reverence, and walked to where I stood slowly, eyes never leaving mine. Then, without a word, he knelt. I blinked, didn't move, didn't breathe. With quiet, precise movements, he took the first slipper from under my arm and slipped it gently onto my foot. Then the second. When he looked up, his voice was low, the kind of low that shakes the ground, even if it never rises. You didn't ask for anything. Not a name. Not praise. Not even credit. He paused. But I want to give you something anyway. A beat. Then, Raya Thorne, his hand rested lightly over my shoe, still kneeling. Will you marry me? Silence. Not heavy. Not rushed. Just still. The king didn't interrupt. He just watched, expression unreadable, but calm. Edric continued, softly now, I love you. Not just for saving me or standing by me, but for who you are when no one's looking. Sharp. Steady. Unshaken. I looked at him, at the man who had bled beside me, and I smiled. Just a little. You're sure you want to marry someone who throws her shoes at people's necks? He grinned, still kneeling. Especially someone like that. The king gave a short chuckle, low and approving. If you'll have him, Lady Raya, he said, you'll have my blessing. And the kingdom's respect. Chapter 8. The garden was quiet again. No guards. No blood. Just soft wind in the vines and moonlight on stone. Weeks had passed since the night of the ball. The kingdom had changed. A little. So had I. The palace didn't suit me at first. Too many rules. Too many eyes. But I carved out my place like I always had. With quiet mornings. With long walks on the training grounds. With honesty. Edric never tried to tame me. Never asked me to play the part of a perfect royal. He let me be exactly as I was. Tonight, we returned to the garden. The same one where blades had been drawn and where truths had been spoken. I wore the slippers again. Not for defense. Just because I wanted to. He walked beside me in silence, hands behind his back, close enough to brush my shoulder with his. No crown. No title. Just Edric. The same one who bled beside me, who asked nothing of me but truth. We stopped beneath the arbor. I glanced at him. You still think I'm dangerous? I asked softly. He smiled. I hope so. I let out a breath, not a laugh exactly, but something lighter. You know, I said, I never imagined peace would feel like this. Like what? Like something I'd choose. Not something I had to survive. He didn't answer. He just reached for my hand, not to lead, not to claim, just to hold. And I let him. The moon glowed silver on the stone path. My slippers clicked gently as we turned. No music this time. But I didn't need it. We already knew the steps. Then, just before we left the garden, he stopped, turned, and kissed me, softly, like a promise that didn't need words. And I kissed him back, not as a girl who'd been broken, not as a blade waiting to be drawn, but as myself, whole, strong, unafraid.